Greetings, comrades! We can talk about the Soviet Union for ages, both the good and the bad. And people who live there can also remember both positive and negative things. And each of them will have their own attitude to certain aspects about Soviet life. But there are things that almost everyone who grew up in the Soviet Union remembers with warmth and nostalgia. And one of these things, of course, is the pioneer camps, which every young Soviet citizen attended at least once. If many people had complaints about the pioneer system itself, all those strange ties, anthems, oaths, compulsory meetings and additional labor activities, then almost everyone loved going to a special vacation in the summer. Today I will tell you how the Soviet Union managed to build an absolutely unique system of children's recreation, and most importantly, succeeded in making it not only productive, but also interesting for the children themselves. What exactly is a young pioneer camp? It is an institution for recreation of children aged 7 to 15 during school summer vacations. These camps were usually located in picturesque places outside of big cities, away from highways and industrial enterprises, near clean rivers or lakes. Every summer, millions of children seemingly went from the Soviet Union to a separate country, to live a special camp life, to learn to be independent, to discover some hidden talents, and of course, to recover and regain energy after a tiring school year. The unique network of pioneer camps, which covered the whole country from Moscow to the outskirts, was perhaps the main achievement of Soviet social policy. No other country in the world had organized recreation for children so accessible or so widespread. Pioneer camps fulfilled a triple role. For the state, it was an opportunity to once more cement the necessary ideological attitudes in children's brains. For children, an opportunity to make new acquaintances and live away from parents and the noisy city for a whole month. For parents themselves, to take a little rest from raising their children. Let's see how pioneer camps emerged, how life in them was organized, and who could count on a voucher to the best of the best places. If you want to learn about the history of the pioneer movement in the USSR, here's my video that covers it in full detail. The important thing to note here is that the original idea behind pioneers was that the state organization would gradually replace parents as the primary educator of Soviet children. Pioneer movement presented itself as a more favorable alternative to the family, free from the prejudices of the past, such as religion, for example. It's not for nothing that in the 20s one of the most important instruments of persecution of the church were the pioneers, who broke into churches, disrupted services, and persecuted the clergy. Moreover, there are accounts that pioneers were assigned the task of propagandizing the ideas of communism even within their own families. But how can the pioneer movement be an alternative to the family if it does not provide the most important thing? A place where a young pioneer can live. The pioneers who were to build a new world by rejecting the prejudices of their old needed a place where that world would already be built in miniature. Therefore, the first camps appeared immediately after the establishment of the pioneer organization in May 1922. Urban pioneer children traveled to villages and hamlets, helped villagers with harvesting, and educated rural children, telling them about the charms of communism. They lived in army tents, so it looked little like a vacation. Therefore, after a couple of years, the whole concept of these camps was revised. In 1924, Deputy Commissar of Health, Zinovy Solovyov, put forward a fundamentally different concept of summer recreation. All camp life, social work and labor processes should be structured to contribute to children's wellness and health. He also created a new type of camp sanatorium, the main task of which was to bring home a healthy and strong child, and well-fed, Since 1925, the main criterion for the success of a pioneer camp was the total weight gain of children, 1 kilogram for 2.5 weeks per pioneer. The first such camp of a new type was the Artek camp, opened in 1925 in the Crimea, which was originally intended as a camp for the treatment of low-income children with tuberculosis, and later turned into the most elite and most desirable young pioneer camp of the Soviet Union. Gradually, by the 1930s, the emphasis was shifted from the child activist to educational work with children, and to the image of the child who gratefully enjoys the benefits provided by the state. The pioneer was now seen not as an instrument of communist propaganda, but as its subject. In pioneer camps, children were integrated into the social reality formed by the authorities. In particular, an important attribute of life in a pioneer camp was the movement of the squad around the camp in rows, accompanied by patriotic Soviet songs or speeches. Any differences are more noticeable in a strict formation, so these movements and formations fostered the habit of identifying themselves with the collective, with a single Soviet organism where they should not be different and stand out. Children were instilled with the idea that the Soviet Union was the best state in the world, the most advanced, the most progressive. The anxious atmosphere in the world predetermined the agenda in the pioneer camps of the 1930s. The pioneers were preparing to defend the homeland. Children not only marched in tactical formations, but also had shooting classes and participated in mass military sports games, the most popular of which was reds and whites. Later, the colors of the players were replaced by neutral blue and yellow, to eliminate the possibility of the class enemy winning. The goal of the game was to capture the enemy's banner. By the beginning of the war, every pioneer had participated at least once in these simulated military exercises. Young pioneer camps operated in the USSR even during the Great Patriotic War, although they had to be evacuated farther from the front, to the east. Orphans and children with health problems, including those from besieged Leningrad, were sent there. In 1944, 2.5 million children visited pioneer camps, a real blessing for their parents in such hot and hungry years. The true heyday of pioneer camps came in the 1960s, 1980s, when they finally lost their much militarized look. Since the 1960s, pioneer camps have had a dual phase. On the one hand, romance, independence, and the desire for freedom. On the other hand, mandatory participation in ideologically verified official leisure time or condemnation of any deviation from the norm. No one could understand what should be more important, leisure and freedom or education and discipline. Let us take a look at how the post-war Soviet pioneer camps were organized. What did a typical Soviet pioneer camp look like? Did children still live in tents? No, only in specialized tourist camps. In general, there were different pioneer camps, both recreational and sports camps, and even camps dedicated to a particular hobby. A camp for radio enthusiasts, a camp for young naturalists, young chess players, and so on. By the end of the 1980s, there were more than 40,000 pioneer camps in the USSR, and in 1987 they were visited by 18.1 million children, or 45.4% of school children in the USSR. And basically all these camps looked about the same. A fenced territory with gates, inside which there was an entrance square, buildings for accommodation of children, a hotel for specialists, a medical building, a cinema hall, a sports hall, a swimming pool, a stadium, shower cabins, a library, a museum, and some facilities for hobby clubs. Usually the pioneer camp worked only in summer. Children were admitted in 3 shifts, which lasted 3 weeks each: June, July, August. Parents brought the school children to the point of departure, where they were loaded into buses and taken to the camps. Or everyone traveled together by train if the camp was far away by the sea. Pioneers in the camp were divided into units, which were formed by age. The first unit is the oldest, then the second, third, and so on. There were about 30 to 40 people in each unit. Each unit was assigned a leader or counselor, who were usually students of pedagogical universities or teachers. Each unit was also given its own building, where boys and girls lived in separate rooms, usually 8 to 12 people per room. The camps were divided into all-union and local camps. All-union camps were the pride of the state, the largest camps in the most picturesque places, usually near the Black Sea. The most famous were, of course, the aforementioned Artek in the Crimea, Orlenok in Krasnodar Krai, Zubrenok in Belarus, and Okean in the Far East. To give you an idea of the scale of the largest pioneer camps, by 1969 Artek had about 150 buildings, 3 medical centers, a school, the Artek film studio, 3 swimming pools, and a 7,000-seat stadium. By the way, children from other countries could also get into the all-union camps. For example, in 1937 a large delegation of children from civil war-stricken Spain arrived there. As a result, these pioneer camps were one of the few places where you could talk to a real person from abroad, even from capitalist countries, or even meet some legend like Yuri Gagarin or Jean Bedel Bokassa, depending on your luck. It was the dream of any Soviet schoolboy to get a place in such a camp. You could be rewarded like this only if you were the best of the best, for active participation in the pioneer movement, collecting waste paper and scrap metal, impeccable behavior, excellent academic performance, and so on. Or because your father was a big shot. Local camps belonged to various enterprises and institutions, and tickets to them were distributed among the employees of these enterprises. It was considered a part of the social package for employees. The more prestigious the enterprise was, the cooler was its pioneers' camp. The biggest enterprises themselves could be located, for example, in Siberia, but have their own young pioneer camps somewhere near the Black Sea. Part of the voucher was paid by the trade union of the organization, and the rest was paid by the employees themselves. The prices were not too high, 10 to 15 rubles, with an average salary of 120-150 rubles. And summer camp vouchers were given free of charge to large and poorer families. Obviously, it was not without blood. If you were the head of the personal department, for example, your children would be in the camp for all 3 months. And if you were a simple worker, you could get 1 voucher, and that was if there were any spots left. Outside of summertime, these enterprise pioneer camps were often used as boarding houses or recreation centers for employees. Nevertheless, in fact, the famous Artek and Orlenok, or some small factory pioneer camp near Novosibirsk, offered children approximately the same set of activities. Everything was strictly standardized. The whole life of the pioneers was guided by a fairly strict schedule, but some minor infractions were overlooked by counselors and educators. Nevertheless, the key role of ideology remained undeniable. Violations of the schedule were reprimanded, and activities that did not fit into the official schedule were ruthlessly cancelled. Children treated disciplinary punishments as an inevitable, albeit unpleasant, payment for the opportunity to be in a new environment away from the parents and the routine they had become accustomed to during the school year. There were usually only 2 fundamental prohibitions: to leave the territory of the camp and to swim without an adult. Naturally, it was considered the coolest thing among children to break these 2 laws and not get caught. How did a typical day in a pioneer camp go? At 7 to 8 am, children were awakened by the sound of the pioneer horn, after which they went out for morning exercise. Then a short period of time to clean their beds and wash up, and again the horn commands all units to line up for the meeting. During this meeting, the plan of camp activities for the day was announced, and sometimes those who were caught behaving inappropriately for a pioneer the night before were also reprimanded. Then a formation of pioneers goes to the dining room, after which comes the time of housekeeping activities. Yes, the pioneers themselves helped to cook in the kitchen and clean the territory. It developed their self-sufficiency. This was usually followed by so-called health procedures, which most often included swimming in a river, sea or a swimming pool, or an excursion to the nearest sites. Sometimes they went on full-fledged hikes in the mountains and forests. Then a little free time, lunch and the obligatory 2-hour nap after it. After that, another light meal called poldnik and again a flurry of activities aimed at children's development. Usually it was some kind of contents, sports competitions, some clubs or hobby groups. Then followed dinner, after which the most interesting things began. Dancing, watching movies and pioneer bonfire around which children sang pioneer or not so pioneer songs to the guitar. Then one more meeting summarizing the results of the day and bedtime at 10 p.m. The main events of the camp shift were the game Zarnitsa and Neptune Day. Zarnitsa was a military patriotic game during which school children were divided into two teams. Children ran through the forest looking for a banner and trying to neutralize the enemy squad. Yes, the same game of reds and whites from the distant 1930s. Neptune's Day was a festival when everyone splashed each other with water and ran around the camp soaking wet in honor of the visit of special guests, Neptune and his entourage, which in fact were the counselors and selected pioneers. In some camps there was even a tradition to throw the head of the camp into the river on Neptune's Day. As I have already mentioned, the pioneer camp fulfilled many purposes. Much attention was paid to the development of children's social skills. They learned to live in a small community without parents, to be attentive to each other, to help the younger ones. But everything seemed to be so formulaic, so regulated. Not the most diverse leisure activities, Spartan environment with showers and toilets outside in small cabins, a dozen people sharing a room, army-like atmosphere, waking up with a horn and marching in formations. So why did children love this strange summer place so much? Most of those who grew up in the USSR remember the pioneer camp as a unique life space with its own special atmosphere, different from family school everyday life. This atmosphere was akin to an adventure, and it was set by collectivism and self-governance, when peers, boys and girls, lived together outside of family and school. In pioneer camps there was life without parents, without the usual patronage of guardians. That is why children there felt more mature, free and responsible. It was possible to challenge and prove themselves in hiking, creativity and sports, in team games and competitions. There were a lot of things there that you couldn't find at home, in the city, at school. New acquaintances, first love, discos. Besides, in pioneer camps there was usually quite a friendly atmosphere among children. You always felt really welcome. And of course, the most interesting things in pioneer camps took place outside the established schedule. For example, lunchtime naps. Who in their right mind would sleep for 2 hours during the day? I'd rather hang out with my peers, play some games or just goof around. Or evening contents, movie nights and Neptune's Day. Those were fun, but it was much more fun to tell each other scary stories at night about a coffin on wheels or the Fisher serial killer, to tie someone who fell asleep too early to the bed with toilet paper, to sneak into the girl's room and smear toothpaste on them, and maybe even convince them to play spin the bottle. And sometimes you could even break all the possible rules and do the unthinkable. Run away to swim at night in the nearest body of water. And often even together with the same camp counselors, who were 17, 18, 19, and were also not averse to breaking these rules sometimes. So, for all their regimented and ideologized nature, the pioneer camps were remembered by Soviet children for their sense of freedom. Freedom from school teachers, from parents, from boring everyday life. and that is why most people now remember them with such warmth. Unfortunately, not all pioneer camps survived the collapse of the Soviet Union. Enterprises and institutions which were already struggling to make ends meet abandoned unprofitable burdens. Old pioneer camps today sometimes look like these, or like this. But in general, the system of children's recreation in Russia continues to work today. However, now sending a child to camp for a month is much more expensive than in the USSR. Moreover, a brand new tourist product has recently appeared in Russia. Pioneer camps for adults, where vacationers are offered to plunge into the atmosphere of childhood, singing songs around the campfire, doing creative work, waking up to the horn. It looks quite cringeworthy, but let's not judge people who just want to briefly return to the atmosphere of beautiful and carefree pioneer childhood. Admit it. To goof off for a month in the summer, eat delicious food and sleep 2 hours in the fresh air in the afternoon sounds not too bad, right? Thanks for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to Steak221, Елизавета Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Zeman Berzy, Jordan Lamotte, Jimmy Albin, Eli, Petr Illich, Hakushiro, and Bruce Eternik. See you guys next time.